Aiming High, Junko Tabei's Daring Climb by Catherine St. John, illustrated by Michael Love. On March 16, 1975, a tiny woman named Junko Tabei stood at the base of an enormous mountain. As she gazed upward, a fierce wind blew snow off the ridges and icy cliffs glistened in the sunlight. It was a beautiful scene, but Junko wasn't there for the view. She had come to attempt something no woman had ever done before: climb to the top of Mount Everest, the highest mountain in the world. It would not be easy. The risks of climbing Mount Everest were immense, even for an experienced mountaineer like Junko. Mount Everest is a place of extremes. Located on the border between Nepal and China, it soars 5.5 miles, 8.9 kilometers, into the clouds. Temperatures can drop below freezing for months at a time. Climbers can get buried by avalanches or fall into cracks in the ice, some as deep as a 15-story building. Altitude is a problem too. The higher you go up in the mountain, the less oxygen there is in the air. This lack of oxygen can cause sickness or even death. Junko knew the risks of climbing Everest, but she was determined to get to the top. It wasn't fame she was after, it was the feeling of joy and accomplishment she got when she arrived in a new place, empowered by her own body. She felt it when she climbed her first mountain at age 10. She felt it when she climbed bigger and bigger mountains as an adult. Now she hoped to experience that feeling on the mightiest mountain of all. She knew getting to the top would not be easy, but she had no idea of the dangers that awaited her. Now that's tall. Mount Everest. Location: border of Nepal and China. Height: 29,029 feet. That's 8,848 meters. Burj Khalifa. That's the location: Dubai. Height: 2,717 feet. 828 meters. Mount Everest is almost 11 times taller than Burj Khalifa, which in 2018 was the tallest building in the world. Not for men only. When Junko was in her 20s, many people in Japan didn't think women should climb mountains. They thought it wasn't ladylike. When male climbers refused to climb with her, Junko formed her own ladies' climbing club. Members scaled some of Asia's highest peaks. Ready, set, climb. To prevent sunburn, members of Junko's climbing team covered their faces with gauze. Climbing a mountain as difficult as Everest required a team. Junko brought 14 climbers, all women, with her from Japan. Each was assigned to a Sherpa, a local guide who knew the mountain well. Not everyone would get to the top, but everyone was needed to help set up camps along the route and move supplies from camp to camp. They would also care for anyone who got sick or injured along the way. Mount Everest is in a range of mountains called the Himalayas, located along the border between Nepal and China. The team set up a base camp near the foot of the mountain with tons of food, equipment, and oxygen tanks. They would need the oxygen to survive at the highest altitudes. Then, in late March, Junko and a small group started climbing. Within hours, they arrived at one of the most dangerous parts of the mountain, the Khumbu Icefall. Sherpa guides. The Sherpa people have lived in the mountains of Nepal for generations, and their bodies are used to high altitudes. Sherpa guides know the best routes up the mountain, and many are so strong they can carry more than their own body weight while climbing. Skilled as they are, Sherpas can fall or get sick while climbing, and many have lost their lives helping others climb. The Khumbu Icefall is an area of constantly shifting ice formed by a fast-moving glacier. 5 years before, 6 Sherpas had died trying to climb through this perilous place. Now it was Junko's turn to try. She passed under blocks of ice the size of houses that could topple at any moment and crush her. She crossed deep crevices, teetering on ladders the Sherpas had placed over the seemingly bottomless pits. One false step and she could crash to her death. Crossing the icefall just once was hard, but Junko and the others repeated the trip again and again to help their bodies adjust to the oxygen-poor air. Altogether, Junko crossed the river of ice 7 times. She was relieved when she could start heading for the higher camps. Little did she know that something even scarier than the icefall lay ahead. With every step, the ladder flexed with no warning, and my gloves, smeared with snow, slipped in on the metal. Here's the Mount Everest route in 1975. So going up and up and up and up. Trapped. A few weeks later, Junko learned that a climber at Camp 3 was very sick. Junko rushed to help take her down the mountain. They had stopped at Camp 2 for the night when disaster struck, and suddenly Junko was the one in trouble. She was asleep in the tent she was sharing with 4 other women when a loud rumble awoke her. Junko recognized the sound immediately. Avalanche! Tons of snow and ice were hurtling straight for her tent. There was no time to run. Now it's over. Now I have to die, she thought. The force of the rushing snow lifted the tent off the ground and tumbled the women inside over and over until they were buried under heavy snow and blocks of ice. Junko, at the bottom, was unable to move. Within seconds, she began to suffocate. Her vision was filled with red, yellow, and purple lights as she lost consciousness. Danger! Avalanche! Avalanches occur when a large amount of snow breaks away from a mountainside and plunges down a slope, sometimes as fast as 200 miles per hour. They can be triggered by snow or rain, earthquakes, or the movements of animals. Once an avalanche stops, the snow and ice can harden like concrete, so it's critical to dig out anyone who is buried fast. More than 75 people have died in avalanches on Mount Everest. Luckily, the Sherpas had been able to escape from their tent after the avalanche hit it. The next thing Junko knew, 4 of them were pulling her out of the snow by her legs. But when she tried to walk, she collapsed. The Sherpas carried her into a tent and put an oxygen mask over her face to help her breathe. Junko hurt all over, but the worst part was that she couldn't walk. The next morning, Junko lay in her tent listening as the other team members discussed her injuries. She heard them decide that because she couldn't walk, she must be rescued by a helicopter. They all agreed that the team's attempt to climb Mount Everest was over. The avalanche had frightened everyone. Well, almost everyone. Junko was bruised and unable to move, but she hated the idea of quitting. No, she shouted out the tent. I won't go down. Don't call a helicopter for me. The team members argued for days about what to do, and each day Junko felt a little stronger. After 4 days of rest, she could walk without help, and she insisted on continuing the climb. Junko and others headed back up the icy slopes toward Camp 3, but they couldn't all continue. The avalanche had buried much of their food and many of their oxygen tanks. There was only enough for 2 people to try for the summit. After much discussion, it was decided. Only Junko and Sherpa Anj Sering would continue. It was all up to them now. My calves screamed in pain, and my knees and thighs were as heavy as lead. The next day, Junko and Ang set out for Camp 5. Junko kicked one crampon, a set of spikes attached to her boot, into the icy slope, then the other, while pulling herself up by a rope. Her calf muscles burned and her fingers felt like ice. She fought to keep her balance with the heavy pack on her back. By the time they got to Camp 6 the following day, Junko's brain was starved for oxygen. It struggled to keep her legs moving. Junko knew her body was slowly dying. Darkness fell, and Junko and Ang crawled inside their freezing cold tent. After drinking some soup, Junko tried to sleep, but the howling wind and the cold seeping through her sleeping bag made it impossible. She thought about how she had spent 4 years planning this trip. She'd been away from her husband and 3-year-old daughter for months. Tomorrow would end with success or with failure. Junko knew that humans can't remain at such a high altitude for more than a day, even when using oxygen. If she didn't reach the summit tomorrow, she would have to descend to a lower altitude in order to stay alive. Tomorrow would be her only chance. The death zone. The area above 26,000 feet is called the death zone because of its extremely thin air and brutal weather. Humans aren't designed to survive in these conditions and will begin to show signs of altitude sickness, confusion, difficulty speaking and controlling muscles, and hallucinations. Breathing supplemental oxygen can help, but the only cure is to descend to a lower altitude. By 6:00 a.m. on May 16, 1975, Junko and Ang were dressed in their climbing gear, with oxygen masks on their faces and a few extra oxygen bottles in their packs. They began their final ascent. As they climbed, the snow got deeper and deeper until it reached Junko's waist. She kept moving, pushing against the wall of snow. Her breathing became so labored that it was all she could hear. Her heart beat so hard she thought it would leap right out of her chest. Then, just as the summit seemed to close, the trail suddenly began to follow a narrow, rocky ridge with sheer drops on either side. Crossing it would be like walking along the edge of a knife. If Junko lost her footing, she would plummet at least 10,000 feet straight down. Junko had thought she knew which parts of the route were the hardest, but no one had prepared her for this. It was scarier than anything she'd experienced so far, even the Khumbu icefall and the avalanche. I'm going to pause there and I'll continue.